Can you see something?
Wait. I think I need to exit and enter your account again because why is it? It's still showing me this. The video has been removed by the uploader. Where is it supposed to be? Line. Oh. I just heard myself talking.
Okay. So can you hear me?
I can, but there is a super lag. Now I heard you say, can you hear me?
Okay. But can you hear me well?
You're a bit far, like talk louder.
Okay.
Because you don't have mics here.
No.
Okay, just speak loudly. I think it should be fine.
Okay. Just want to see how far. Not very far. Okay. Cool. I'm ready. We good? We good?
Yeah, just now be louder.
Cut out all this. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Hello and welcome to Racing Bilingual Kids. I have to stand here. Racing Bilingual Kids Strategies for Success. My name is Edward or Eduardo, if you do speak Spanish. I am a language teacher. I've worked as an interpreter in the past before, and I also work with families, parents who want to help their kids have a bilingual education. It's the dream for a lot of families. How can you make sure that your kids learn a language from an early childhood so when they grow up, they don't have to go through the difficult process that, honestly, it is very hard, having to acquire a second language, isn't it? So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about me first. Me and my mom, so that you know what's my story, who am I, what do I have to do with languages, and frankly, why should you even listen to what I have to say? So this is me, that's me right there, that's my mom. And what does my mom have to do with any of this? I would say the dream, the idea of learning languages and for me to be able to communicate in a foreign language is not just my dream, it was always my mom's as well, since I was very little. Instruction manuals, as you see over there, was the thing that we used to do. So to give you a bit of context, I grew up in Costa Rica, that's my home country. We speak Spanish, that's our native language, which means that up until the age of 16, I could not for the life of me say a single thing in English. I remember the first lesson I took, well, that's not true, we do have English in school, it's not great, but the first time I went to an actual English class in an international school and I needed the bathroom and the teacher said you are only allowed to ask for things in English, it took me about 20 minutes in the dictionary and a few friends to figure out how do I even say, can I go to the bathroom? So, suffice to say, I speak on this subject from the perspective of, I wish I would have been bilingual growing up, rather than have to struggle with it when I was much older. Me and my mom really wanted to understand other languages, to communicate with other people. And as such, when my mom was at work, she would bring out instruction manuals that they were ready to throw away. That were in English, from the office where she worked, she would hand them to me and be like, read them. And I would read them. Did I know what I was reading? No. Was it right? Probably not. Most likely, I was mispronouncing everything. But it was such a shared dream, and it was such a treasured thing for us that we would literally sit and read instruction manuals. Also, we didn't know what they were. I would just read them, and me and my mom would just look at each other like, so cool, it's English. It didn't matter that we didn't know what it said. It was just the dream of speaking another language. So that's my mom, and now I'm a polyglot. That's where it started. That's where the dream began. Now I can speak obviously Spanish, English, Chinese, Mandarin, and Polish. That last one with a bit of an asterisk, I'm not great at it, I'm working on it, but well, here we are. It's been quite a few years since reading instruction manuals, not knowing what they were or what they said, but both to me and my mom's very happy satisfaction, I can read them, and now I can even tell my mom what the things in English say. So that's where I come from, that's my story. And I think there are a lot of families, especially a lot of the families that I work with, have this dream, share this dream of they want their kids to either acquire a second language that they themselves don't speak, or if they migrated from another country and now they live in a majority foreign language nation, they want their kids to be able to inherit their own language. So let's say if I had kids of my own and I live in the UK, I would want them to inherit Spanish. And that's what today is all about. How do we do that? How can you do that at home and help your kids either acquire a second language from early childhood or pass on a language you had that you could inherit? So let's get started. These are today's goals. This is what we're going to be talking about, what we'll hopefully be learning. What I would like you to take away from this seminar, workshop, whatever you want to call it. Today's goals, we have the plan, the environment, the myths, the challenges, the tips, and then any Q&As if there is anyone that has any questions. If there are any questions, if anyone, I do have people here to help me see if there's anyone that asking any questions, we'll get to them in the end. The plan, I really like the phrase of, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Now that's not to say I'm perfect with plans, I'm really bad with plans, but I've learned my lesson. You really do need a plan. So we'll talk about the plan. What can you do so that you don't find yourself with 18-year-old kids being like, yeah, we could have passed the language, couldn't we? But we didn't do it. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know how to go about it. So we'll have a plan. The environment, if you don't live in the country where the language, the target language, we'll be referring to it as the target language from now on. If you don't live in a country where there is a target language majority, well, how are you going to guarantee they have an environment for it? And that's the old question of, should I move to a country where they speak the language that I want to speak? And we'll get to that. The myths, I do like mythology, but no, we're not going to be talking about mythology. We're talking about the myths of language learning. And specifically, the myths of bilingualism in early childhood. What are the pros, what are the cons? What do you need to be worried about? And what are just myths that you don't really need to be worried about? But it's always good to know them, know what they are, and know what you can do when these things come up, right? And then the challenges, very real problems that you will face, that you will run into as a household that is trying to do bilingualism. What do we do then? And what are these common challenges that a lot of families have? A lot of the parents of my students come to me often texting me, because I work with the kids, but I work very closely with the parents as well, and they'll be messaging me, emailing me, and asking me questions of like, okay, well, I noticed this is happening at home with my kid. What do we do? Where do we go from here? And then the tips, which is a bit of that. Well, what things can you be preparing ahead so that the journey is a little bit smoother, okay? It is a hard one, but it doesn't have to be as hard, hopefully, if you're not alone. So let's get into the plan. So we have a family, we have the kids, there is a target language, and we want to pass on the language. Let's first start talking about OPOL, O-P-O-L. This stands for one parent, one language. This works mostly in the context of a parent who already speaks a language, who's fluent in the language that they want to pass on to their kids, and then there is a parent who speaks, the majority language. So let's think of a scenario that's going to make it easier to understand everything that we're talking about and all the concepts. The scenario, let's say it's myself, I would pass on Spanish, that's my native language, that would be the target language in this scenario we've constructed, and the main language or the majority language would be English because I live in the UK. So if I had kids, Spanish would be the target language, English would be the majority language, right? Well, what is OPOL? That would mean that one of the parents would speak one of the languages and the other one would focus on the other. I would, for example, be the one focused on Spanish, and then my partner would be focused on English for the sake of this experiment, for the sake of this exercise. How much? Or what are we talking about? Is it a morning routine kind of thing? I talk to you in Spanish when you get ready for school. Is it an evening when we're having dinner, you're having dinner, and then I'll talk to you in Spanish? There is no perfect amount that I can tell you, oh, this is exactly how many hours per day you should give input to your kids. However, there is an ideal amount, which is 24/7, realistically speaking. So if you choose to go down the route of one parent, one language, you have to try to be as strict as you can with it and stick to it as much as possible. Now, there are some linguists that have done a bit of experiments because unfortunately this is all quite a new field of research. It hasn't been done as much as we wish it was, but there have been some linguists who have done this. There is a American linguist whose name I can't remember right now, but he lived in Japan and he wanted his kids to be fluent in Japanese, where that would be the majority language, and in English, which would be his target language, their home language, which is another term for it. So he said, okay, well then I'm going to be the one who speaks to them in English. What that means, and even in his own book, he says, I don't necessarily recommend you be that strict with it, but he said, I will never let my kids hear me utter a word in anything but English, regardless of the context, regardless of the situation. So he avoided social interactions where he would have to be speaking in Japanese. With his friends and family, he would mostly just stick to socializing with the kids in a context where he could stick to English only, for the sake of the kids only hearing English coming from him. Now, he did all of that for years, he wrote the books about it, and he suggests you don't have to take it that far. It's okay, they can hear you speak in another language. It's about addressing them. And this is where I feel like the majority of the agreement from the linguistic community is, it's okay if they know that you speak another language. The key thing is not to them. You address them in the target language, in the language you've chosen that you're going to be working with. So I would stick to Spanish. I would stick to Spanish. Now, what does that mean? I would stick to Spanish. Well, if we're having dinner and my partner speaks in English and I speak in Spanish and the kids are there and I have to give them an instruction, I will tell them whatever it is I want to tell them in Spanish, regardless of the fact that there are other people around in the room that might not speak Spanish or might not understand Spanish. My partner does understand Spanish, but let's take it to a friend group. We're in a group of friends, we're all having dinner, my friends don't speak Spanish. Well, then what do we do there? You introduce this, right? Like, I think everyone is quite understanding when you tell them, hey, look, so we have this thing going at home with the kids. It's a thing we're doing with the kids. Usually if you'll be hanging out with friends, well, they are friends, they're close to you, they know your kids, they know your goals. And so you can happily tell them, just for the goals and for everything we're doing, obviously I do speak English and I will talk to you in English, but to my kids in front of you, I will talk to them in Spanish, only because that's just how we're going to try to ensure that they inherit this language, okay? And if you need to, then proceed and say the same thing twice, just so your friends are aware of what the plan is or what it is that you're doing, you can do that, right? There's no harm in having to translate or say it again. That's fine. The main thing is be strict, mostly with yourself, in terms of using that language. Because this then becomes a problem later on, where a lot of parents come to me and tell me, well, we were doing fine, we were doing great, the kids are actually, they're making progress and everything. The problem is, now they understand everything I say in our target language, but they don't reply to me in the target language. They keep talking back to me in our main language. So we try to get ahead of the curve with that problem, and how we do that is you're very strict about it. If they're used to only talking to you in the target language, it would be a lot harder for them to, out of the blue, start switching and switch on you and start talking to you in the main language. If they do, and we'll get to that, but if they do, just ignore them. Don't ignore them, I'm joking, but we'll get to it. You don't ignore them, but there are things you can do. And just going with the flow is not one of them. So we'll get to that. Time and place. Let's talk about some other options, some other strategies you can follow. So we have the one parent, one language. It's important that you talk about it, that you plan it, that you discuss when and how is it going to be done, who's going to be in charge of what language. And it's not just talking, right? You do have like homework time when they go to school. They're going to have games. The games are going to be played in the language that you are in charge of. So you do have to take that very seriously. Time and place is a little bit different. It can be used as a strategy when you need to rebalance things. Let's say you feel like they're leaning too much on one language. Some families, like this book that I was reading from a linguist, an interpreter who lives in London, her family speaks, well, let's see, Cantonese and Mandarin, so the two main dialects of Chinese, English, of course, and Russian from the dad of the kids. So there's 4 languages in this household. That's a lot to juggle. They do have the one parent, one language going on, with mom with Chinese and dad with Russian. There is a main language being English because they live in London, they live in the UK. But then there is also, there are 2 variants of Chinese, it's not just the one. So we're talking already about 4 languages. That's where time and place comes into place. As redundant as that sounds. Time and place simply works like this. You say, okay, Friday nights, we do dinner in this language. This one would also kind of require a bit of more commitment from your partner to be like willing to at least participate in a bit of learning of the other language if they don't already speak it themselves. Right? So back to the example of this family that I was talking about. If the parents are going to be deciding that for time and place of Friday dinner, it's Russian time because the kids are falling behind a little bit in Russian. They're doing fine with English, they're doing all right with Chinese, but Russian is falling a bit behind. Then they say, okay, you know what, let's introduce Friday evenings. We do a few games, we do some board games with the kids. After dinner and the whole dinner and games time, it's all going to be family time done in Russian. It would work a lot better if obviously mom can also join in and be like, yeah, I'm also learning Russian. In this particular case that I'm talking about, yes, and I will leave links and names to all of the books that I'm quoting later on the description of these videos, because my memory doesn't do me justice with remembering all the names, but in their household, the mom does speak enough Russian to participate in these kind of activities. So it is recommended that if you're going to do that, you're going to at least need to participate in a little bit of learning the language as well. And I mean, why not? It brings your family closer together, and it also shows the kids that it is challenging, but it can be done, and you can do it together. So that would be time and place. There are many other activities you can do with this one. You could do games, you could do arts and crafts on the weekend. You just pick the language you're going to do them in. You can watch a video. So let's say you're going to learn how to do origami with the kids. Well, then you're going to watch a video about origami in the target language, and then you're going to do it, and you're going to have the conversations while you're doing it, follow the instructions and all that in the target language. So that's time and place. And then we have bilingual schools, a far more structured thing that you can do, especially with parents, and this is where we come into what about parents who don't speak the target language. So a lot of my students speak Spanish, learn Spanish with me. They're Vietnamese, they're fluent in English, but they want their kids to learn Spanish as well. Their parents speak Vietnamese and English, but not Spanish. So then they come to me and they're like, can it even be done? How do we make them trilingual at this point? How do we make sure that they actually are fluent in Spanish from an early childhood if neither of us at home speak Spanish? Well, we can't use the one parent, one language. Time and place is a lot harder to do because nobody at home speaks the language. However, I do argue and I do tell all of the parents of my kids, take the time, still do it. Watch the movies, watch the cartoons, watch the videos, watch a cooking show with your kids in Spanish, in the language that you want them to learn, even if you yourself don't understand. Eventually you can turn to them and be like, what are they talking about? Can you tell me? What are they talking about? I want to know, right? And they'll be happy to not only participate in this together, but feel like they can help you. It makes them feel accomplished because they're now using their skills that they're acquiring. They see the fruit of all the effort by helping you understand what it is that you're watching. But we also have bilingual schools, right? There are obviously some are out of reach financially for some of us. They might be a bit too expensive, but there are also weekend bilingual schools. Depending on where you live, there are cities that have a very big community of international people, have moved there, have relocated there, and for that reason, there are a lot of languages. London, one of my favorite places for this particular reason, has, I believe, over 300 languages are spoken in London. One of the cities with the most languages in the world, followed closely by New York. So if you're in any of those places, of course, you'll be spoiled for choice, but it doesn't mean that you don't have those options elsewhere, like here in Leeds where we are. We have a lot of options for people who speak different languages. That being the case, you will be able to find families who do have this language as a home language, and they would have events on the weekends. A Saturday French school is something that I've heard about that happens here every Saturday. Families of kids who want them to inherit French because their parents or one of their parents speaks French, they take them to a French school on the weekend, and it's just a 1 hour, 2 hours thing that is organized weekly, and you can take them there and they can participate. It's not like anyone's going to ask you, wait, can you speak French? Because otherwise your kid can't come. It doesn't work like that. They'll be very welcoming, and if anything, they'll be very helpful. They will understand that your struggles are a lot harder than theirs because you can't help them yourself personally, your kids, I mean, with the language because you don't speak it. So they'll be even more willing to help you and give you guidance and tell you about books and movies that they could watch and where to find more resources. So bilingual schools, really, really useful. And then language immersion. Takes us to a similar thing, but once you've gone to this language, bilingual schools, weekend school thing, you'll make friends. And it is very important that you use that in order to help your kids immerse themselves in the language. At home, you're going to do it with movies, you're going to do it with videos, you're going to do it with cooking videos. I keep talking about that because I love cooking and that's how I keep learning languages. I always watch videos about cooking. But about whatever you like and about whatever you want your kids to enjoy and what their interests are, you can do that as well. So that's where the language immersion comes in. Of course, it would be so much easier if you just moved to another country, but not all of us have that option. So that's there. The options are there. We'll talk a bit more about immersion later. But this is essentially the plan. You need to lay it out. How are you going to do this? What's the approach? Who's going to do what dates, what methods, and there are a lot more that you can research. So there we go, the plan. Let's keep it going. We are, just keep track of time. The environment, this is what we're talking about. The environment, the immersion. This is the bit where everybody goes, and I get this question all the time. Do I need to move to another country so I can learn this language? Especially my students who learn Spanish. They're like, do I need to move to Spain? Do I need to move to Latin America? Or people tell me, yeah, I'm making some progress, but you know what? I feel like I'm just going to have to move to another country, aren't I? Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And yes, that would help a lot. But the things holding you back from learning the language here will go with you on the plane and hold you back over there too. I've met people who have very successfully or unsuccessfully not learned the language while living in the country of the language. So it's not a solution to all of your problems. It's not a magic pill. It helps a lot, but if you don't have the methods, the attitude, and the systems in place to learn and acquire the language, it's not just going to magically do it. Now for kids, this changes, of course, because if you just take the kids and you put them in school, they kind of don't really have a choice, do they? Now they're in school. But that's also going to make their lives really, really hard because now they're going to have to adapt through the very difficult changes of being a kid, but in a language they don't even speak. So do we really want to put them through that? Like, I'm not saying don't do it, but if you do it, keep in mind that it doesn't mean that that fixes everything and there is nothing else to consider. So if you don't have that option, what do we do? I really like this picture because it is said that it takes a village to raise a kid. I don't know because I don't have kids, but it feels like it probably does. I've seen it. I've seen what it looks like. And it does feel like it takes a village. And so if it does, in terms of language, it also kind of does take a village. Because of course your kids will learn a lot from you, but you can't be the only source of language for your children. You can't be the only source of the home language or the target language that you want them to learn. Because otherwise, it's not going to be as expansive, right? You can only do so much. So, what can we do to create that village if we don't live in a place where we have that language? The language-rich environment at home. How do we do that? I've said it already quite a few times. You have movies, you have YouTube, you have TV shows, cartoons, you have cooking shows, you have baking shows, you have any hobby that you like. There'll be videos about it on the internet. If this was in the 90s, this would be a lot harder. Still doable, because it's not like bilingualism got invented in the 2000s, but it's so much easier now, because the materials are accessible, right? As long as you've got Wi-Fi, you'll be sorted. You have access to all of the sources, all of the materials. And if you don't know where to look, well, then you go for the teachers, and you go and ask them. You go to the weekend schools, and you ask the other parents, what can we watch with our kids at home for this language? And you become strict with this. I kind of use a version of these myself to upkeep the languages that I've been learning, because it took a lot of work to learn them. Would it make sense to lose them? So when it comes to Mandarin, for example, I live in the UK. I get zero opportunities to use it. That's not to say there's no one here that speaks Mandarin, of course there are, but I don't have in my day-to-day. There are no situations in which I need it often enough and enough of it that I wouldn't lose it or it wouldn't regress. And since it was one of the hardest languages and one of the latest ones that I learned, well, it's a very big risk. So I make an environment at home where I listen to music, I watch TV shows, sometimes even podcasts. I'm not that big into podcasts, but I try. And you should try too. find the thing that you like and do that thing in the language. It comes with a bit of a philosophy that I have when it comes to teaching. It's not like I invented it, but the whole thing of, I get that the language is your target, but you have to try to remove it from the goal a little bit. Because if it becomes so much the goal, at some point it almost feels like it's unreachable. Because you're so focused on it that you kind of miss what was the expression? The forest for the trees for the forest. You know what I mean? You miss one of the things for the other thing. You're not seeing the big picture. So you take the language, which was your goal, and you put it on a second plate, and you make the goal something else. So back to the same example. You like, okay, let's pick another one. No more cooking. You like knitting. There you go. You like knitting. So then you're like, okay, I'm going to watch a video about knitting. Why? This is the goal. The goal is to entertain myself. I like watching it. I like learning. I want to learn this new pattern, so I'm going to do it. But I'm going to do it in my target language. So now in your brain, subconsciously, the goal that was the language has gone into a second plane, and the main goal has become the content of the video, the knitting that you're trying to learn. And that's how you go about building a rich environment at home. You do that for yourself, you do that for your kids. If it works for you, it works for them as well. Online tools, we said it already plenty of times. You have YouTube, you have online schools as well. You can find tutors online. I don't work there anymore, but I used to work for italki, which is one of the biggest platforms for finding tutors at affordable prices for specific languages. And they're tutors, they're not teachers. But some of them are teachers, of course, but a lot of them are just tutors. So you could just book 1 hour for them to just have a conversation with your kids. You could just book an hour and you sit with your kid and you just supervise and they just have a conversation for 1 hour. You tell your kid, hey, bring your toys. You're going to show your favorite toys to your tutor over here. And you're just having a little chat. And they'll try to do that in their target language. And that's a very useful tool. A lot of my students do that. Half of my lessons, sometimes it's just them telling me about their life and what they like. You know, that some of them are 5 years old, 6 years old. Of course, we try to do a lot of learning, we try to do a lot of work, but they're kids. Even I get bored, and I'm not 5 years old. Of course, they'll get bored if all we do is just talk and talk and talk about language content. So they'll need a bit of that, and it's useful because you have it at the tip of your fingers online. And that's how you build your community. You also go out and make friends. Friends who speak the languages that you want your kids to inherit. Whether that be because it's your own language as well, that would make it easier for you to make friends. If it's just for a language that you don't speak but you want your kids to speak, well, again, people are very welcoming, especially when it comes to sharing in the experience of acquiring a language or passing the language down to kids. They'll be happy to organize play dates with your kids and their kids so that they can play and they will have that opportunity to practice a little bit of that target language in a context, in an environment that feels a lot more natural than having to just be drilling the language into them and constantly asking them, what does that mean, what does that mean, how do you say that, how do you say that, right? Which is not very productive. That's the environment. Let's look at the myths. Common myths, and then we'll talk about silent periods. Common myths with languages. There are a lot of myths. There are a lot of myths, especially when it comes to children learning languages, but I feel like one of the main ones that we should start talking about more is, are they going to regress because I'm trying to teach them another language? If you, let's say, in my example, I'm teaching them Spanish and I want them to inherit Spanish from me, but we live in the UK, would my kids fall behind relative to their peers at school when it comes to their language level in terms of English? Is that a problem? It's not. It's not. The short answer, it's not. The more nuanced answer is, well, you have to look at what is actually happening. Because it does look like it is a problem. I know why it's a myth. I know why people ask this question. Because sometimes you look at the kids and you compare and it does seem like they are falling behind. Because at school they'll ask them a question in English and they would be confused because they only know how to say that in Spanish. And so they're like, well, there you go. There's the evidence. They are falling behind. Well, first, they will catch up. Second, it takes time for them to understand and discern which language is which. That's why the one language, one parent system is so important, because that helps them from very early on to differentiate this language is this one and this one is that one. Because this one, when I talk to one of my parents, we communicate, but if I switch to the other one, we're no longer communicating. And that's why shouldn't answer them. I mean, you shouldn't ignore them, but you shouldn't just simply carry on the conversation. You should ask them, wait, sorry, say that again. So let's say that you're the parent in charge of Spanish and your kid addresses you in English. You don't just carry on the conversation, you also don't just turn your back on them. You switch to Spanish and you tell them, perdón, ¿cómo? Otra vez, no entendí, ¿me repites en español? Right? So you switch to Spanish. And that signals them, oh, the thing I just said, the language I just used, that's not the same as this other one. And that's going to get ahead of that problem that can happen when they go to school and they start figuring out, oh, it's not all just one cluster. Because that's the problem. If you let them cluster it all into one thing at home, where at home you communicate in a bit of English and a bit of Spanish and you just basically make it into Spanglish, when they go to school, they're not going to be able to so quickly simply go, oh yeah, no, I know that in my Spanglish that's the Spanish and that's the English. How are they supposed to know? And then they go, let's say they go to visit your family back home where they only speak in Spanish, and same problem. They're not going to be able to just simply take the English out of their Spanglish. It doesn't work that easily. It takes time. So you have to build it into the process. And that's how you avoid that problem. If it already happened, well, that's what time and place is for. You practice to make sure that you reinforce what language is which and which one we can use when. However, even if that is happening, it doesn't mean that the kids will fall behind entirely. The worst case scenario, and sadly the most common one, is that the parents will freak out, the parents will get worried, understandably so, that their kids are falling behind, so they'll stop using their home language, their target language, and they'll focus on the main language, and then the kids will grow up and one day they'll be 20-something and they'll be telling their friends, yeah, I can kind of understand a bit of Spanish, like I understand a lot, I can't say anything though, and I'm not really fluent in Spanish, but yeah, that's about it. And obviously their English has zero issues, like they'll have no problems with their English, but they will have problems with their Spanish. And that's sadly the more common thing that happens. So definitely don't give up. Definitely don't pull back onto just defaulting to the main language, because you're not creating a problem. It will get better. It does get better, and that's what we're going on with silent periods. And this is a common thing. Language acquisition is not simple. It's easy in terms of, well, you do this, you do this, you do this, and then you acquire a language. But at the same time, the process in which the brain acquires the language, that's not simple at all. And we kind of don't really fully understand the whole thing entirely, how it really works. So for that reason, these moments when it seems like they're regressing are really hard to explain. And they're really hard to get to the bottom of what is really happening. But one thing we do know is that there is something called silent periods, where babies and children that are bilingual emulate this behavior, and even adults, I do this with Polish. You go on long periods of just listening, just taking it in. Subconsciously, you're learning. Consciously and actively, it might look like you're not doing anything. It might look like you're not making any progress, or it might look like you've just completely fallen behind, but you haven't, you're not. You're just processing, taking it in, and subconsciously learning how to use this language. What do we say and when? What is the context for the words? What are the conjugations that are appropriate to the situations? And then you can come out and use it. So that's the silent period. So be aware of that. If you have kids at home and you're going to try to do this, be aware that there will be times when one of the languages, they'll simply just stop using them as much. And it's not because you confuse them and they don't know how to talk anymore. It's because they're going through a silent period where they're just trying to assimilate, and they'll come out of it. Just keep going, encourage them, and don't give up. I think that's the main key of today's talk is don't give up, really. The challenges that you're probably going to run into. No, as it says right there, meaning when the kids default to the main language, when they refuse to talk to you in the target language or in the home language, what do you do? Does this happen? Yes, all the time. It can happen. Kids do it because, well, it's just a part of the process of growing up. Kids are just testing boundaries. They're constantly challenging authority. It's part of upbringing. It's part of growing up. So they will do that. It's not an exception when it comes to language. So when they do that, you have to be prepared. When they do that, you have to know that, much like with your rules, right? If you have rules at home and you tell your kids, hey, go brush your teeth and then go to bed. And they go, no, what do? Do you give up? Do you just go, well, I guess my kids don't brush their teeth today? No, I hope. So, same with the language. Don't give up. They refuse. Okay, well, you don't have to get angry. You don't have to yell, right? Again, same thing. If they say no to brushing their teeth, you're not going to lose it and start yelling at them. You'll explain. You will find a way. With patience and with care, you'll find a way. Because you know it's important, because you know you can't just simply give up on it. Well, same with the language. You don't give up. You also don't lose your patience. I know that's easier said than done because, again, I'm not a parent, so it's probably easier for me to say, be patient, but do be patient. And don't give up on them. And keep trying, and keep encouraging them. And more importantly, don't give up on trying and simply take the easy way out of just switching back to the main language. Don't let them default. Because if you do, well, why won't they? They tested the boundary and now you let them. So they'll be like, okay, cool. Then whenever I want to, I can just switch back to English and mom and dad won't care. So I can just do it whenever I want. And when I don't feel like putting in the effort to think in Spanish, we'll just go back to English and they won't mind. So we can't have that, right? You have to be strict with it. You have to be strict with if it's in the time and place where you decided that it's Spanish only, well, it's Spanish only. If it's in the environment, let's say it's a family visit or it's a play date, or let's say that it's a one-parent language and they're addressing you, the parent that was supposed to be only in Spanish, in English, don't just simply flow with it. And this is very important. What I mean by don't just go with the flow is if they talk to you in English, it's not enough that you respond in Spanish and keep the conversation going. You have to pretend that you don't know what they're saying. Now, of course, they know that you know, but that's not what's in question. You have to tell them that they need to say it again in Spanish or whatever is the target language for you at home so that they get a reaction out of you or what they get, what they want, what they're asking for. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay? So don't just simply answer back in Spanish and think that's enough. And for sure, don't tell them how to say it. Not at the first time. If they don't know how to say it, then that's fine. They can ask you how to say it, right? It's the same with kids that are growing up with just one language. Well, at some point, they don't know how to say anything, and they ask their parents, how do I say this? How do you call that? What is that? What is this? What is that? And you tell them, right? So the same thing with the target language. You just tell them. Right. Now, parents that don't speak the target language, what do you do? Because this is the other big challenge of you want your kids to inherit a language. You want your kids to be bilingual, trilingual, but you don't speak the language. What do? You rely on the internet, you rely on tutors, you rely on a very well-structured system. Much like the parents that want to inherit a language, to pass on a language, will structure their time and play dates and will structure their one-parent language. They'll have a lot of plans and structure for that. You will have a lot of plans and structure. The only difference is that instead of being you the source of the language, you have to go and get the source. Is it going to be a tutor online on iTalking? Is it going to be videos that they're going to be watching? Is it going to be cartoons in a different language? Go and change the settings of your Netflix or your Disney Plus at home. Not sponsored, by the way. If you want them to practice that language, well, change the settings of all of your apps so that they become familiar with there is a source. The source can't be you, and of course that's a lot harder, but there needs to be a source. And it's important that if it's a tutor, for example, you build a relationship with that tutor so that they also know the goals, because at the end of the day, they're talking to your kid in a language you don't speak, so you have to make sure that this is someone that you align with, right? A lot of the work I do with the parents of my students and my kids is I talk to them, I have calls with them every now and again, we have conversations, I know them well, we're on a first name basis because I'm teaching Spanish to their kids, but the parents don't speak Spanish. So they want to make sure that what I'm teaching is aligned with what they want them to be learning. The topics and everything that we're discussing is things that they approve and they're okay with. So it will take a lot of work. If anything, I don't know, maybe it's more work than if you speak the language yourself. But I guess what we can say is, for the parents that speak the language and they want to pass it on, there is maybe a lot more work than you thought, because it's not going to be as simple as just, oh, I speak the language, so surely they will too, because I'm just going to speak it around them and that's it. No, there will take a lot of planning. And then for the parents that don't speak a target language, I assume you already imagined there will be a lot of work, but your work is not going to be that different from a parent that does speak the language. if that makes sense. You're simply going to change the source of the language, being not you, but someone else. But the work will be there, and the work will be done, and it's not impossible, okay? So that is the challenges. We don't have time, then we finish. The tips that I can give you. The main one, consistency is key. This is the same for all languages, for all levels, for all levels of language acquisition. If we're talking about early childhood education, if we're talking about second language acquisition, if you're talking about second language acquisition as an adult outside of the education system, it literally doesn't matter what the environment, what the background, and what the level of your language acquisition is. Consistency. And that comes from me, who's very bad at being consistent. But I do for sure don't give up. I'm not as consistent as I should be, and I would probably be much farther in my journey of language learning if I was more consistent and I stuck to it, but don't give up. So consistency is a bit of a tricky thing, because I feel like, or maybe this is just my experience, I've been on a long journey of relearning what it means to be consistent, but it means that if you're going to be consistent for a week and then on day 8 you fail, a lot of us, or maybe just me, give up and go, I failed to be consistent on the 8th day of this week, so, well, that's it. It's all gone now. Because I did 1 week, and then on the very first day of the second week, I ruined it all. So let's just give up and do something else. No, that's not how it works. You don't give up. Fine, you didn't do the first day of the second week. Try on the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. You'll come back eventually. Just come back, please. Don't give up. Stay consistent. Whatever that means for you. However you can do that, stay consistent. Especially for your children. If you're doing it for your kids, I feel like it's easier to be motivated when you're doing it for someone else, for someone you love, for someone you care about. I'm a lot more consistent when I'm helping my family and my friends than it is for my own things. So must be the same with parenting, I'm imagining. Again, I'm just talking really out of my imagination here because I'm not a parent, but I think you might agree with me on that. Family life. So you see that picture over there? We're back to food. I'm sorry, I know I said I wouldn't, but we're back to food. Cooking. It's a thing. You have to do it 3 times a day. Well, I guess it depends on the culture, but mostly 3 times a day. And kids need food. We need food, so do it in the target language. You learn recipes. They'll have to learn how to read one day. So you print out the recipes and you go, here, honey, you read the recipe, your mom and dad are going to cook. You give us the instructions. Now it's a game. Now they feel like a part of it. If they're too young to be actually in the kitchen cooking with you, they can just read it out to you. If they're too young to be in the kitchen, they're too young to read. You figure that one out. Listen, I'm not a parent, okay? I'm telling you how to teach them the language. I don't know how you do parenting. But involve it into your family life. Whatever that means to your family. Are you a family that goes outdoors all the time? Well, you're going to go and you're going to talk about everything you see. Come home and make a little diary of what did we see when we went out to the park today. We went on a hike. What did you see? Tell me in your target language. What did you learn? What interesting animals did you find? I took my nephew to the park. Well, this was a while ago, but I think last year's summer, so not last summer, I took him to the park and I was like, hey, let's do a game. I wrote on a big piece of paper before we went to the park, so again, it takes preparation and consistency. So, big piece of paper, each one of us had our own paper. We drew a map of the park we were going to go to, then we made some little boxes, and then we drew a little animal of the animals that we knew live in this park, and then we left a little box so that when we went to the park, we could like cross it off when we spotted each one of those animals. Well, you can do that in your target language, right? With him, I was doing it in English because he speaks English, and that's the language that he wants to mostly speak in, and his families are bringing him in English, but you can do that in your target language. But there's no reason why you can't do that in Spanish. There's no reason why you can't do that in Mandarin or whatever language you want to ask me. Whatever your family life looks like, include the language into your family life. Because at the end of the day, even though this and me and the entire existence of my brand and career on the internet is language is the goal, is it really? Because at least it's not for me. You know, let's take it back a moment here. When me and my mom were reading instruction manuals, was it because we cared so much about the language manual? No, again, we didn't even know it was an instruction manual. We did it because we cared to communicate. We wanted to communicate. The dream was to communicate to other people from other countries in other languages. That was the dream. That was the goal. So that is going to be your family's life goal. Communication. Not the thing you do, not the language itself. So you need to do things. You need to live in the language, exist in the language. Because at the end of the day, well, do you think that kids in Spain who speak Spanish natively, or kids in Mexico who speak Spanish natively, or kids in Brazil who speak Portuguese, their parents don't go around telling them, you better make sure you speak Portuguese, because, you know, your little one, that's your goal. Like, no, that just happens. They're just going about their life. They're just going about their family life. The language is just in which it happens. So you need to do that, replicate that, but in your type of language. And again, remove it from the pedestal of language is the great goal. It's just a way, it's just a means to a goal, which is communication. So there we go, that's that. Let's have a look. Do we have any questions there? No? We could? No, there, I mean there. Okay, cool. So we can skip this part. If you're watching this video after it was live and you do have questions, leave them in the comments and I'll come back to the video every now and again and I'll answer your questions. I love getting questions from people. I love getting questions from parents, especially because as much as I love this subject and as much as I love all of this and as much as I work with a lot of different kids, I don't have kids at home. So I don't get a day-to-day actual experience of how this is. So there might be a lot of things that you have questions about that I can't think of. So I'll keep on reading the materials. I'll keep on teaching my kids and I'll keep on teaching my students and learning more and more about this whole world. And you keep on bringing the questions to me. So leave me any questions you have in the comments and I'll come back to them. That's it. That's all I have for you. Woo, perfect timing. That's all I have for you. That is, my name's Edward, or Eduardo in Spanish. My first name is Jonathan, but that's my family name. And then if you want to reach out to me, obviously Langtech Academy here on this channel where you are watching this video. Langtech Spanish on Instagram. Also, if you want to learn Spanish and you're an adult, I do teach adults as well. Langtech Spanish on Instagram, you can reach me there. Or if you want to send me an email, say hi, ask some more questions, tell me a very long story that doesn't fit into a comment on YouTube about your kids and the problems that you have and the challenges you're having, well, send me an email as well. Langtech2017@gmail.com. Time flies. That 2017 is from when I started doing this. So Langtech2017@gmail.com, send me an email there and I'll happily read it on the bus on my way to work and hopefully I'll have answers for you. And as I always like to say, if I don't have the answers, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm really sorry, I don't know, but I will reach out to everyone else that knows a lot more about this than me, everyone that I learn from, and I'll get answers for you. Once again, I'll leave in the description of this video, I'll leave all of the other sources and books that you can read, other materials or articles you can read about if you're curious. And otherwise, yeah, thank you. See you next time.